conversation usually starts and stops at Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, and Debussy. But why aren't any black composers included in this list? For example, Duke Ellington, the most prolific jazz composer of all time, composed over 3,000 works of music in his entire career. To put that number into perspective, if you combine the previously four-mentioned composers, they would still be 300 songs short of Ellington's total. Even though black Americans have made some of the most important contributions to music, their legacies and work are deemed as inferior or as a detriment to society. The most important contributions black Americans have made to music is jazz, which is the foundation and most influential genre in American music and globally. What I hope to convey to all of you is that black culture is American culture and that the two can never be separated. In 1902, the city of New Orleans housed the red light district Storyville, which was the city's center for prostitution and gambling. That same year, a young Creole man named Ferdinand Joseph Lamont found work there playing piano at a brothel. Though the pay was great, he, at the time, was living with his disapproving grandmother, and when she caught wind of this, promptly kicked him out. Shortly after, he moved west to California, where he became jazz's first great composer, and contributed to the Great American Songbook under a new name, Jelly Roll. New Orleans in the late 1800s was home to a diverse population of Africans, Europeans, and people of mixed race. Slavery undoubtedly played a role in the city's cultural hybridity, and the earliest jazz traditions can be traced back to slavery. In this journal of Simone de Prat's, an 18th century French explorer, he writes as early as 1718 about enslaved Africans meeting in Congo Square to sing, dance, and he even observes some of his slaves singing work songs to pace their work. Though enslaved, black people in Louisiana were allowed to use hand drums, unlike in many other places across the South, which allowed them to bring polyrhythms from Africa to America. Across the Mississippi Delta, enslaved people combined work songs and field hollers with European religious hymns to form the blues, which served as a compositional foundation to jazz. Spanish and French colonization also created a large population of lighter-skinned black people with Spanish and French ancestry called Creoles, some of whom had special social status to be able to afford to study music in Europe. With the Supreme Court's 1896 ruling in Plessy versus Ferguson that segregation was lawful, the enforcement of segregation laws in Louisiana meant that Creoles lost their elevated status their skin tone had always assured them. As a result, Creoles could no longer play music with white musicians. They started to play with the formerly enslaved Black and Afro-Caribbean musicians. Together, Black and Creole musicians created a new genre of music, jazz. By the 1910s, this early form of jazz would be used by white people in minstrel shows to mock black people and would come to be known as Dixieland jazz. In fact, the first jazz recordings were done in 1917 by an all-white musician group called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band, who took New Orleans style jazz and claimed it as their own. It wasn't until 1921 that Kid Ory became the first black jazz musician to record a jazz record, but he did so on a so-called race record made only for black artists and audiences. The 1920s turned partying from an activity to a lifestyle, and no one embraced this lifestyle more than Fats Waller. A stride pianist and protege of James P. Johnson, Waller performed in speakeasies non-stop. He became so famous that one night he was kidnapped by two of Al Capone's men and forced to play piano for 2 days straight for Capone's birthday party. If the last name sounds familiar and you're a football fan like me, that is because Fats Waller is actually the great-grandfather of former NFL tight end Darren Waller. Author F. Scott Fitzgerald dubbed the 1920s the Jazz Age, and in cities like New York and Chicago, the jazz scene boomed because of the Great Migration. The influx of black people into major cities in the North led to this explosion of black art and culture that we know as the Harlem Renaissance. This explosion embedded jazz into the greater American consciousness, providing a sense of freedom, even if it was just for the night. In these underground clubs, women broke traditional social norms and could smoke, drink, and flirt in the open. This was also the time when Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong rose to prominence. Louis Armstrong brought an emphasis to solo improvisation and the trumpet to the forefront of jazz ensembles. His range and virtuosity remain unprecedented, and he popularized scat singing. Duke Ellington, on the other hand, is jazz's most prolific composer. His calling card early on was his band's jungle style, in which they supposedly mimicked the jungle noises of Africa. These songs, like East St. Louis Toodaloo, which I played before, were accompanied by women dancing in grass skirts with the stage backdrop set to look like a jungle and were meant for primarily white audiences. Ellington's unique composing style, called the Ellington Effect, utilized the unique talents of each musician within his band, creating a sound that couldn't be replicated by other composers. By designating black art and music as inferior or improper, what are these criticisms then saying about black people? It is important to learn black history in order to understand how black culture and American culture are inevitably linked. If you enjoyed any of the music in this video or are interested in listening to more jazz-inspired artists, I would suggest Thundercat. Stephen Berner's guitar style is heavily influenced by funk and jazz fusion, and he's even worked with artists like Silk Sonic and Kendrick Lamar. I want to thank you all for staying to the end of the video, and I hope that you all enjoyed. I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.